There's a feeling in the public that this application, this proposal for a 6 million ton liquefied natural gas facility in the Saanich Inlet is absurd, that it's ridiculous, that it's never going to happen, it's highly unlikely. People have said to me, Adam, why have you gotten so involved in this? You know, this project is very, very highly unlikely. It's never going to happen. It's an insane project. Can you imagine building a subsea pipeline to supply this facility, and then the carrier transports in and out, and a large, you know, 3 large floating natural gas facilities on the other side? Nobody can imagine that. The project is going forward. The project is happening. They've got an export license for 6 million tons annually for 25 years. And in addition to that, they're doing the studies and the research right now to put together an application for what's called a project description. That project description goes to the Environmental Assessment Office, it goes to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, and these 2 agencies then accept this project as a project for an environmental assessment. So despite how absurd or how ridiculous this project may appear, the reality of this project is that it is going forward.
Yass Mountain is a sacred mountain to Malahat First Nation and our surrounding First Nations, including the Saanich Inlet tribes, South, Tsaikum, Pakwachin, Tartlip, and Malahat. And there's other communities, the Songhees and the Esquimalt and the Cowichan tribes. This is a sacred mountain.
Well, Yass is our sacred mountain. It's we have many stories about Yass and our Thunderbird that lived in Yass, and so we have a deep spiritual connection to Yass and to our people. It's not just a mountain. It's not Malahat. It's much more than that to us. And you know, it's very insulting when they characterize Bambleton as an industrial site. You know. And because it's Yass, it's very sacred to us, and it's always been part of Saanich. From day one, from their announcement, I went over there when they did the announcement, and was gravely concerned that they didn't even come over to Sartlip to have a conversation about this, and that they started the project with an interim chief, and I don't know, it was just quite concerning, and I knew that Sartlip's position on these kind of projects and protecting our inlet have always been consistent in that, you know, our first and foremost concern is protecting our environment and protecting our rights, our Douglas Treaty rights and inherent rights. And so it was pretty easy to say that we are opposed to this project, Malahat, Steelhead LNG, and that it's reckless and it's dangerous, and it would harm this inlet for forever.
Saanich Inlet is unique in a whole lot of ways. It's the southernmost fjord on Canada's west coast. It's one of the most open fjords. A fjord is a body of water that extends into and is typically surrounded by mountains. And the mountains here are fairly low, and there's not nearly as much fresh water running into Saanich Inlet as there is into many of the fjords on the west coast. And so there's a lot more nutrient. At one time, Saanich Inlet was one of the most productive salmon fisheries on the coast. The First Nations people knew that for centuries. And over time, it degraded until we got to the point in the 1990s where people were ecstatic if they managed to catch a salmon. And that's coming back. We're building up the nutrients. The Sea Change Society has planted eelgrass along the coast here, and we're getting more and more feeder fish, more and more salmon. The inlet is actually becoming a very productive area, and I would really hate to see this plant go in and ruin that.
Yeah, I've been doing some reading and some calculations in the absence of any information from Steelhead LNG. And it is true that if you have, for example, a 500 megawatt power generator, that the amount of coal used to generate the power emits twice as much greenhouse gases as methane. But what this doesn't take into account is the methane that is lost during the drilling, during the fracking, and during the shipping. And if you look at the greenhouse impact factor of methane, it's roughly somewhere between 38 and 39 times that of carbon dioxide. And if you take that into account, then the total amount of greenhouse gases emitted by natural gas is the same as coal. So we're not doing the world a favor. It's a floating facility, so that most likely water will be used to cool, to absorb the heat as the natural gas is liquefied. And if that is the case, then they would be warming 33,000 cubic meters of water by 10 degrees Celsius every hour of the year. And if the warming is less than 10 degrees Celsius, then the volume would be greater. But we're pumping out the equivalent of 13 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water warmed by 10 degrees Celsius. And the water that's being released will also contain a biocide because the company would not want to have barnacles and other creatures inhabiting the cooling tubes. So we have a warm water with biocide impact. What that will do to the inlet, I have no idea. We need an aquatic ecologist to study that.
The other one is bringing tankers in. What kind of noise is that going to bring? And what are the effects of that noise? And the jury's still out on the effects of noise, but we want to stay with the precautionary principle. Last season there were both orca and humpbacks here in the inlet. So we do have an inlet that's trying to come back. And those are two main effects that would really worry me about tipping it back over into a precipice from which we could not recover.
We don't know what this facility will be at Bambleton, but a comparable facility is proposed for Nova Scotia, and they did a study of noise levels. And that particular facility will have the average noise level of 85 decibels and peaking at times at 115 decibels. So I don't know how far that noise will spread to impact people and other creatures, but it's interesting that the Saanich Inlet is funnel-shaped, and we really need an acoustic engineer to determine what impact that noise has or how far it will reach.
You know, we're focused on Saanich Inlet, but I guess one of the other bigger issues for the marine environment is climate change, and that we have all over the world, including right here at our doorstep, this problem of as more and more carbon dioxide is absorbed by the ocean, then we've got an increasing acidic level of the ocean water and increasing temperature. Both of those things are problematic for a lot of reasons. So it's really important when we consider all of these industrial developments that are natural gas to look back upstream at how much fracking would need to be done in order to have this kind of industry happen here. And fracking is a huge problem in terms of our footprint with climate change. It would put a whole lot more carbon in the atmosphere.
We have to remember that fracked gas is a problem upstream for communities in northern BC. This LNG problem is not just happening here in the Saanich Inlet, it's happening in Howe Sound, it's happening at Lalou Island, and it's connected to all these fracking fields in the northeast. There's no good reason for BC to become a sacrifice zone to this industry, given that there's no market conditions for it. Fracking, we know, aside from all of the other problems with groundwater contamination, has a major impact because of the methane that is released. Also, even in the operation of LNG plants, when you liquefy it, it takes a great deal of energy, and then when you regasify it at the other end, it takes a great deal of energy. One of the ways they try to get around this in the industry is to use their own natural gas to power that system, but that just creates more pollution. It's about 20% of the energy that you are extracting is actually used up in that gasification and liquefaction process. So this is a very inefficient plan. And within a global context, it simply doesn't make sense for us to be investing in this kind of infrastructure when we need to be using all our rapid energy and investments to transition away from fossil fuels.
A lot has been said about the proposed terminal here, but there's one thing that people haven't talked about a great deal, and that's the fact that for years and years there's been a pipeline taking natural gas from Canada down into Washington at Sumas. And the Americans are no longer buying a lot of our natural gas, so the proposal is to extend that pipeline to Cherry Point and then bring it all the way across here. And one of the questions that has occurred to me is why aren't they just building the terminal at Cherry Point? Why would you build this 75-kilometer pipeline and force your tankers to come all the way around to the Saanich Inlet and all the way back out again? Why not just do it at Cherry Point? And the answer is that the Americans are conscious of the safety of their citizens, and they have very strict controls over LNG plants that Canada seems not to have. And so no one is too concerned, apparently, about the safety of Canadian citizens here, except, of course, people like Adam Olson and the Saanich Inlet Protection Society and the various associations that are protesting against this plant.
I don't know if it's so much apathy, but maybe a sense of like it's going to be taken care of, or reasonableness wins the day, and time again that's proven not to be the case. What really wins the day is people standing up and speaking loudly.
And I think a lot of people live in this area because they appreciate the environment, they appreciate getting out, they appreciate being able to enjoy nature. And those people are really very concerned about this, and very concerned about all sorts of heavy development that would have an impact on both the inlet and the surrounding area.
It's a special community where we are on First Nations territory, and I, as a business owner, want to be part of a community where we're honoring what we have for resources, honoring what's on the land and what's on the water. And I will do all that I can to make a voice of objection to large industry coming into the Saanich Inlet.
The inlet is our livelihood. We come to the water for both for spirituality, for recreation, for sports, for fishing. This water is sort of all-encompassing of how we are as a people.
I really do find it hard to discuss, because I think the term somebody used thousands of years ago, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Just come down here and follow the route that was given to us by Steelhead, and you will say to yourself, what on earth is mankind coming to? This is stupidity.
Our health is being endangered, the health of the environment is being endangered, the health of sea life, the health of people, not only physically being endangered, but our economy is being endangered, tourism is being endangered. It's a development that we must stop.
To me, it's the whole idea is completely asinine. This is a beautiful spot, it's a pristine inlet, the water environment here is unique. There's only 2 other places in the world that are very like it, and we're going to run any risk of wrecking that. It's wrong. It just shouldn't be done. It shouldn't even be considered, because we're tourists dependents around here. Look at all these boats here. Those boats don't all belong to people who live here. They're tourists that come here. Are they going to come here and thread their way around tankers? No.
So while we're looking for leadership from particularly a new federal government and their promise of 1.5 degree climate change, which I think is kind of the most important point of all of this, is that up until this point there's been little faith that seems reasonable from that sort of leadership, and particularly from a provincial government leadership. So the Saanich Inlet Network and my own personal feeling is that where the change is really going to happen is from a grassroots community level, and how do we bring people together and speak in one numerous strong voice against this sort of corporate control.
During operations, and this is a long-term operation, 25 years of operations, there will be 200...
This isn't just about money. This is about value. This is about the threat to our quality of life.
what we have here. And basically all it was a forum to facilitate Steelhead LNG to pump out their propaganda. So it was very discouraging. And it was just another example of how ineffective this process is. The security search, that was bizarre. What are they afraid of? Well, I think everybody was just surprised that that was even happening. There was obvious majority opposition at that meeting, and it wasn't addressed. It was just kind of passed over. And it really bothers me that this process is so tedious, so dysfunctional, so indirect. I think it just creates confusion. Like, who are you supposed to believe? Are you supposed to believe, you know, what the proponent is saying? Or are you supposed to believe what Olin Finn is saying? I mean, he had 11 points, basically about how dumb, how stupid it would be to put a project like this in the Saanich Inlet. Are we supposed to disregard that? Let's start with some real questions here and get some real answers. You know, all he was able to answer that evening was the same pat answers. Basically, he covered himself by saying, we're just in the starting stages of this. So we really haven't determined exactly what we're going to be doing there. Well, that's not an answer. Basically, I think we have to approach this guy like we're talking to a used car salesman. You know, if he's saying it's going to create all these jobs, well, I don't know. Is that really true? Isn't it going to jeopardize the jobs in the Saanich Inlet? Look at our economy in this area. It's recreation, it's tourism, it's, you know, all those little kayak rental places around the inlet, spas, bed and breakfast, butchart gardens. You know, it's not big industry. We don't want this. It's as simple as that. It's not going to be to our benefit.
You never listened to those people that done the environmental studies. You guys never listened to that. You never included in your presentation. All you're concerned about that goddamn mighty dollar. Not me. I'm concerned about the land that needs to be preserved. And there's not one thing that you guys said we will abide by the laws of the Salish Sea, which clearly says anything that is detrimental to the environment of the Salish Sea is not allowed in here. You people are detrimental to Saanich Inlet LNG with those tankers coming in. Number one, you got a big arm going out, you got tanker ships tied up to it, you're sucking in the water, coming out, pumping it out, chemicals in the water coming out, that's polluting my livelihood.
So have you met the company?
I don't need to met, I don't need, I need, all I hear is people like you pushing out the bullshit.
Well, I don't represent the company. I'm saying maybe what you should do, well, maybe I can connect you with the company and you can express these concerns.
We talked with them already, we told them, no way. No way on earth you guys are going to be allowed to come in.
Well, then it sounds like there's a significant impasse, but it would strike me...
It is going to have a significant impact.
It would strike me, given that these are very, very early days, that they have not filed their environmental certificate.
You are representing and talking about 40 people that sit on that represent others is LNG. 40 people. That guy over there, he said, I talk on behalf of 40 people in our company. They're not talking about the people.
represent.
We've got 100,000 people in Saanich Inlet.
But listen, I don't represent
And
Steelhead
then
LNG.
you shouldn't be up here trying to convince us what you guys are doing
I
is a
think
good thing,
from a
because
British
it's
Columbia,
not.
Well, okay, then we'll I guess agree to disagree on that.
You
Because
should know you can disagree with Mullen, but what you're representing and what you're doing, you should be a politician because you can hand out the bullshit better than anybody. All that stuff you had up there
I
is
was
a bunch of
politician
lies.
for a long time, so I think I'll stay away.
It's a bunch of lies.
Well, I guess we'll agree to
I've
disagree.
been here
then.
longer than you. I've been lived in this land longer than you.
I appreciate your concern.
That's where I stand. That's what I'm going to do.
At some point, I can come out and have a long conversation with you. I'd appreciate it.
Our fight's not with the Malahat. Our fight was the LNG.
I get that. I hear that. But I would like to come out and spend time just to understand your concerns more directly.
Anytime.
Okay.
You just make an appointment with our chief and we'll sit down and talk to you anytime.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Okay.
I describe myself as an accidental activist. I spent 25 years in the corporate world and wound up as a partner in KPMG, retired. And then my children approached me and said, you know, you're retired, you don't know anybody, anything, you got all these degrees, you got all this experience, and we have a thing for you to do. It's called Leave Us a Better Planet Than You Got From Your Parents. Steelhead. Why does a company who's never built or operated an LNG facility ever decide to build it in Malahat? If you look at these people, who they are actually backed by a pension investment company out of Calgary, whose real money comes from pension funds in mainly the United States, and whose normal bag is to modus operandi is to take a company, junior oil and gas company, and formulate it as a prospect, get its approvals, and then take it to market as an initial public offering. And that's their normal business, that they normally clear out or greatly diminish their holding in that company at that stage. They're a venture capitalist. Not the sort of people who are going to hang around and actually do the business of operating this in a responsible manner for 25 years. They will sell it to the highest bidder or bidders. LNG has a reasonably good track record as far as tankers are concerned. There are some international rules, one of which from their own industry is do not locate LNG facilities in narrow inland waterways with significant ferry, recreational and pleasure or recreational and commercial traffic, of which Saanich Inlet is a prime example. I can't imagine how you're going to pilot a 300-yard, 1,000-foot long LNG tanker into a narrow inlet like Saanich Inlet, turn it round, load it with 60,000 tons of dangerous flammable LNG, and maneuver it back out through pleasure craft, kayaks, barges pulling logs and various other, and concrete, and all through and past the innumerable ferries going in and out of Force Bay, without ever having a single accident where they whang into one another. And if that happens, the studies done in the United States say up to 3.5 kilometers out from that accident on either side, depending which way the wind's blowing, you're going to kill 50% of the people. That is why there are rules prohibiting putting LNG facilities in such places. Those rules exist around the world, but not in BC, where the current government doesn't want to know about instituting such rules because the places in which they have chosen to locate LNG facilities, Howe Sound, Malahat Peninsula, the mouth of the Fraser right by Richmond, the port of Prince Rupert and Kitimat, are all areas of pretty dense populations who would be at risk from these facilities. And I don't see it. I think that BC is attempting to turn itself into a third world country when we really should be focusing on a more positive industrial policy and harvesting those resources we do have that are renewable, rather than stick to a 19th century fossil fuel trade. That's gone the way of the dodo bird, and we really need to have a more powerful voice for a more progressive industrial policy which we could be quite successful. That would include harvesting the sun, the rain, the wind power that we have in abundance in BC in order to create an industry in which we could be a world leader without sacrificing our climate and our environment to do it.
Renewables and alternative energy sources are outperforming fossil fuels the world over. If Canada wants to be a world leader in climate action, we need to start actually putting our money where our mouth is. What's encouraging, particularly in the British Columbia context, is that companies and communities aren't waiting for governments to really help support this. We see the transition to a post-carbon society happening on an almost hourly basis with the explosion of green tech and renewables that are happening in this province. I've been fortunate enough to run a project for the last year and a bit through Sierra Club called The Future is Here, where I've gone to about 13 different communities and discussed what's going on in the post-carbon transition in their community. And everywhere I go, people are excited about electric vehicles and solar community installations, their organic gardening. They're bringing it back to the place that they call home and looking to the future and about protecting that place.
There's lots of stuff in the international press about the essential demise of fossil fuels within the near future. I mean, just forget looking at this from economic, from environmental issues or moral issues, anything. Just look at it in terms of dollars and cents. The future of fossil fuel is not going to be economically viable for British Columbia in the near future, or for the world.
And you've got to remember, there's something called the curse of Bambleton. And the curse of Bambleton is that when the cement mill was shut down, however many years ago now, I forget, beginning of the last, about 80 years ago, they've had several proposals to redevelop down there. Everyone has been kiboshed by local opposition. None of them have been approved. And I'm not going to approve this one.
I'll start from 1992, I think it was, where people came to the area and it hit the media and television and everything, and they said, you know, they're building 5,000 homes and some other development. And so I let my mother know what was happening. And she more or less pushed me out the door. She said, I want you to go stop this. This is a sacred mountain. Nothing or nobody can disturb this area. And, you know, at first I was lost, because how do I stop something huge, this huge? But I started off as just one person, and it grew to Friends of South Couch and our local community in Mill Bay, and the Saanich tribes, Cowichan tribes, and some of the Victoria area tribes. And they all walked with me more or less, I guess, to assist in stopping that Bambleton project that was going on with the major development. And they call it a sacred schacha. So, you know, anything that's sacred to our nations is, you know, is something that I guess schacha has two meanings. One is an omen and one is a blessing. And they call this one a sacred mountain, I guess, a place of healing. They call that mountain a place of healing, the sacred waters that comes from the mountain.
I guess it is frustrating for when proponents come in and they have completely disregard our Douglas Treaty, because, I mean, it's been recognized at every level of the court, and it's been affirmed by the Crown. And these are not fake rights. They're not, we don't have to assert them. They're already recognized. And so that's the big thing, is that, our Douglas Treaty is there to protect and preserve our right to hunt and fish as formerly. And industry just can't seem to grasp that.
I think there's every possibility that it will become a productive fishery once again, that people will be able to go out and catch salmon, perhaps not to the extent they did when there was a small cannery here and people used to bring in 400 pounds of salmon to be canned to take home. But certainly you ought to be able to go out and catch 1 or 2 fish. And I think that's going to be quite possible in the next 20 or 30 years, provided that this thing doesn't go ahead.
But if we can look after the streams and the creeks around this inlet, if we can look after the water and ensure that we're not polluting it, to remove the pollutants from the inlet, if we can nurture the fish-bearing streams back to this place, then it can once again be returned to the glory of those old days. And maybe one day, maybe my grandkids and my kids and grandkids will have the opportunity to once again walk across the backs of the salmon to see their relatives on the other side in the Malahat or in the Mill Bay. So this is the vision of the Saanich Inlet that I think most people who come here and live here have. It's a place of pristine environment. It's ecologically unique. It's got an amazing local economy that flourishes in and around it. It's culturally diverse. It's got an amazing cultural history to it. And it's those things that I think that if we shone the light on, if we shone the spotlight on, if we put the magnifying glass over those things, they would present to us an opportunity, a tourism opportunity, a cultural opportunity, a source of food gathering, which as this world changes, as climate changes upon us, we need to be enhancing the local food, places where we harvest local food. That's what this place is. This place is not an industrial wasteland. It is not a place appropriate for a liquefied natural gas terminal.
And there are many stories that are not only tied to the mountain, but tied to in the ocean with our salmon and the whales. And our connection to the land and water goes to when we're Quilnuk. In our language, we're Quilnuk, and that means we're the last created in this area. The Creator wanted us to be in this water. He wanted us to walk the lands, to fish the waters, and to speak the language as it was intended by the Creator. And that's what we're doing, is trying to protect that and ensuring that we can continue to hunt and we can continue to fish, and that our language stays alive in this area. And a project like what the proponent is proposing would completely do away with our way of life. This inlet is so important to us and means so much to our community, not only to Startlet, but to the other Saanich bands as well. It just would decimate all the efforts that we've put into the inlet to rehabilitate it and over the last couple of years.
The point is, that's a sacred mountain, and it will remain a sacred mountain to us. And my word is, we should be getting that land back free and not pay $32 million for that area because of what our ancestors called sacred, and we still call sacred today.